Hello, and welcome to NAIFA's Advisor Today webinar series. Today, we kick off a really incredible webinar series that we've been planning for quite a bit. And in celebrating Women's History Month, we're starting with a whole panel discussion on this. I'm delighted to be joined today by our three speakers and authors. We have Thomasina Skipper, Daralee Barbera, and Linda Witham. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and have each of our ladies go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we will get on our way. Linda, let's start with you.
Sure. I've been in the financial service industry for about 28 years and am currently working as a coach. And I sort of retired, semi-retired, but this is such a great profession that I couldn't stay away. So I am doing coaching now, mostly with financial service advisors.
And Thomasina, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I retired from State Farm, a multi-line company, after 26 years and was way too young to sit around and do anything. So I started coaching and consulting and having a lot of fun. We really are excited about talking to women today and helping them become their best selves. So we've been doing this for a few years now, and I'm really looking forward to having a lot more fun helping grow people.
Wonderful. And Daralee?
Well, hi and hello, everyone. I'm Daralee Barbera, and I also have spent my entire career in the financial services industry or profession. I spent 34 years at Waddell & Reed, 30 of those as a managing principal. All three of us have almost 100 years in leadership between the three of us. And I too am coaching at Diversified Professional Coaching, and most of our clients are in financial services, and it is just a pleasure, as Thomasina and Linda said, a great way for us to serve, and we're really happy to be here today, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of housekeeping items for anyone who's online with us. If you'd like to go ahead and ask a question, please do so in the chat. If we have enough time, we'll ask the speaker authors to be able to respond to that. And if not, we'll take those. We usually try to compile them, give it back to the speaker authors, and we make a nice blog post out of it so we can all share with us. Also, the recording will be available on demand. If you want to share it with others, we'd be delighted for you to do so. And this is all a give back to the industry. So all of this is completely, perfectly free. If you're not subscribed to the Advisor Today blog, please consider doing so. It is all about the live, work, give of financial advisors and the good work they're doing, as we have today that we're going to witness with our panelists today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Linda, to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. Before we dive into our agenda, I just want to give everyone a little bit of background of how the three of us developed our book, the cover of which you see there, Women Matter. Back in 2015, I walked out of a professional meeting, and I was quite frustrated with the number of women in the meeting represented and some of the language being used. And I just sort of said, we've got to make a difference. And I turned to two of my best friend, successful women in the organization, Daralee and Thomasina, both of whom created some diversity. Thomasina coming from multi-line, Daralee coming from the financial planning world, and I came from the insurance world. And we said, let's get together. And of course, collaboration is the best way to do that. And a few years later, after a lot of work, we came up with this book, and we're currently working on a second edition to update it with some current research. So having given you that background, let me just sort of summarize what we're going to do in our agenda today. Obviously, we're celebrating women. As Suzanne said, this month is Women's History Month. And then we're going to talk about why gender parity is so essential, the why, and hopefully just touch on, because there are many, many solutions, but give you some thought-provoking solutions for achieving gender parity and some next steps. So I'm going to turn it over now to Daralee.
Well, great. Thank you, Linda. So next slide, please. Here we go. Well, March is Women's History Month, and thank you, NAIFA, for celebrating it. The month commemorates and encourages the study, observance, and celebration of the vital role of women in American history. February 28th, 1909 marked the first Women's History Day in New York City, which commenced the one-year anniversary of the garment workers' strike, when 15,000 women marched through Lower Manhattan. Then the day became Women's History Week, in 1978, and an educational task force in Sonoma County, California, kicked off Women's History Week on March 8th, which has become International Women's Day, in 1978. And they wanted to draw attention to the fact that women's history wasn't really included in K-12 school curriculum at the time. And before we started this presentation, we were all actually talking about the lack of information about women's history growing up. And in 1980, it became an entire week in March. And in 1987, it became Women's History Month. So every Women's History Month has a theme. And the theme for 2020 is Women Providing Healing and Promoting Hope. And if we look to our little pie chart here on the right, we are reminded that 2/3 of caregivers are women.
So we talked about International Women's Day is March 8th. It's a global day. We celebrate it all across the, the planet on our social, economic, culturally, and political achievements of women. Imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world where being diverse, equitable, and inclusive will make a difference and is celebrated. So together, we can forge a really great environment. So collectively, we can all go to hashtag break the bias and celebrate women's achievement, raise awareness and against bias, and take action for equality. Some of the partners that are part of this are LinkedIn and John Deere. Next.
So let's move on to the second part of our agenda, which is why gender parity is important. And here you see a couple bullet points that we should take into account as we in our financial service profession. Go ahead and click, Suzanne, on the next one. You'll see that women actually make up 51% of the population in the United States. And even very impressively, there are more educated women than men. Look at those statistics. 57% of bachelor's degrees are being achieved by women, 61% of master's degrees, and 51% of PhDs. So you can see that women exert a lot of control over the not only education world, but also the wealth. 1 in 3 out of households is headed by women, and 2/3 of the consumer wealth is controlled by women. And so when we look at both households and businesses in terms of wealth, 31% of private firms are headed by women, and they're growing at 1.5 times the national averages. So if your focus as a financial advisor is on the business community, this is definitely something that you want to zero in on. So in the labor force as a total, 47%, and even higher in age 16, 57% of all the labor force is women, and 49% of employed women are primary bread owners. Now, we know because of the recent COVID pandemic over the last 2 years, this has been a particular challenge for women when you see that 2/3 of the caregivers are women, and that became more and more important during the pandemic. Next.
So we've known for years that women live longer than men, right? That we have a much greater longevity. And that means we need to have more money. If we're going to live longer, we need to have more of these assets. Longevity and earnings have been around for a very, very long time. And it also impacts the volatility. So women need the financial service industry way more than they've ever needed before. Second, women have comparatively lower lifetime earnings. If they're only making 82 cents on the dollar, and they tend to have to interrupt their careers to take care of their children and the parents, you know, they're the sandwich generation. So, and many times, this impacts the woman's ability to really accumulate the assets that she needs in retirement. Interrupted careers, lower pensions, all of these things have a real devastating impact on women, which also leads us to our next issue, that women in poverty. Women have a greater exposure to widowhood at an earlier age, and they have a greater chance of living in poverty. Helping women invest and plan for longer retirements and for all of the things that they have to do as far as caregiving really makes a big difference. Women are often caregivers in their family, and they use the money and talent and time to help others. We're always giving back. And the money behaviors of women, that's interesting. We found through our studies is multi-generational. So if in fact a woman has not developed the right financial habits, she's going to pass that on to her children. So it matters how we save, how we help them prioritize their spending, manage their risk, and invest so that good habits can be formed and then passed on to the next generation. Next.
So let's look at women as clients. Women typically make great clients, and they tend to fit that ideal client profile for advisors and agents, particularly if you're looking for clients that want to be informed and capacitated decision makers. And of course we do, who doesn't? And there's two primary reasons for that. So typically women like to have information, they like to have time to review it, and they like to make informed and well-researched choices. And the best way to work with women clients is by first creating that client-centered relationship around them and with them, and then we focus on sales second. So, and as we can see here, that common sense client process just may not be so common, as research shows that 87% of women want to work with a financial advisor and only 17% do. And for all of us here on the Zoom, that's probably just heartbreaking to hear. So fewer women work with financial advisors than men, and many are skeptical of financial advisors, and they're not happy with their services. And if we look at the next one, about only 15% of advisors are women across the distribution channels, and that's as of 2020. But as we look at the numbers as they progress, we just don't see them progressing hardly at all, and certainly not fast enough. So where males tend to dominate the profession's clientele, even among married couples of clients, the advisors' primary relationship also tends to be with that male spouse. So we found this personally disappointing. And so we had a shout out in our book that we published in 2016 that by 2020, we'd have 50% of advisors, client-facing licensed people by 2020. And that certainly hasn't happened. The trend has actually decreased. And that's why we're writing our new second edition, which we're launching this year, because we still have a lot of work to do. So, and as we look at the next one, today, women are working more, they're earning more, they're owning more, and making more financial decisions than at any point in American history. McKinsey estimates that by 2030, women are likely to control the majority of the 30 trillion in assets owned by the baby boomers. And if we look at the next slide, women represent, or I'm sorry, just the bullet, women represent a significant marketing opportunity for our industry, for our profession, but they're generally overlooked and underserved. This is because they're either not deliberately targeted by advisory firms, or because they just don't have the visibility of how appealing or compelling the services are that are being offered. So we as advisors, we need to make an effort to build those relationships with women, particularly among when we're working with couples, rather than focusing solely on the male or the decision-making financial person. We need to focus on both. And if we look at that statistic, that 70% of widows switch their wealth management relationships to a new institution within 1 year of the spouse's death, that just has to resonate with us about what a real issue this is. And so while women generally need, of course, the same basic services of men, they have expectations for levels of competence, professionalism, and knowledge from their advisors. They have, in addition, some distinctive preferences and needs that firms need to, that advisors need to be able to meet. And we as a profession have been slow to meet those. So the statistics strongly support the need and opportunity to better serve the women's market. And the important question that we want to ask is, so what are we waiting for? So there's seems to be a marketing disconnect, as with only 1 out of every 4 financial advisors being female, and not that it's only women advisors who serve the female marketplace, because men do too. This is really a problem that needs an expedient solution. As we were doing our research and certainly being observers of the profession, we looked at that, say out of all male practices and practitioners, maybe we'd be fortunate if 50% deliberately targeted, marketed to women. And as we look at female advisors, it's not like 100% deliberately target market to women. So we definitely have a gap. So next slide, please.
So, we hope we have convinced you or given some very strong reasons why there should be gender parity in our financial profession, because there is definitely a market, as we've just outlined. And for those of us, and I think we all share this, a passion for making a difference in the community. If those 2 factors are strong, why is there still no gender parity? And so in the next couple segments here, we're going to talk about some of the biggest problems that are sort of a headwind against us moving forward in this area. Next.
So we'd like to present to you 10 very thought-provoking questions for your reflection. So our first question is, who do you think is actually responsible for gender parity in your organization? So kind of, if you have some scratch paper there, check all that apply. So is it the senior leadership? Is it your immediate supervisor manager? Is it you, or is it someone else? Well, we think that this is an all hands on deck project. It takes individual effort to create collective visibility of the problem and the solution, and certainly the opportunities. So we as individuals, we certainly cannot control what other people do, and we don't want to, but we can lead by example and influence others by being role models to take positive steps toward gender parity. So that's our first question. Here's our second one. If there is at least 1 woman on the leadership team, is that enough to make a difference? Yes or no? Well, certainly 1 is better than none, but research does show us that when there are at least 3 women in a group, input is more balanced, more authentic, and more effective, and results are improved. So next, please.
Yeah, and before we jump to this slide, I just want to add too to what Daralee just said, that when there's only 1 woman or 1 minority in the room, there's a lot of pressure to conform. So you lose the true benefit of diversity of thought when everyone is conforming. We usually want to have at least 3 people so that you can get really good, robust ideas. Now let's talk about this question of self-promoting. How do you feel about a woman engaging in self-promoting? Is it appropriate? Is it acceptable to do? Is it okay for others to do, but it kind of makes me uncomfortable? You know, that's one of these issues where self-promotion requires a lot of confidence. And we've found that sometimes our female advisors feel like that's being a little too pushy. And it's okay for men to be aggressive, but women, for years ago, I know when I entered the industry, I was told and put through a class with other women, and we were told that we needed to be assertive and not aggressive, as if it was a bad thing, where our male counterparts, if they were aggressive, they were applauded and promoted. This whole self-promotion issue is something that requires deep reflection. Do women need to know more and be more successful than men to get a promotion? you'd probably ask depending on what gender you are, you might say yes, you might say no, not necessarily. But I actually did have a client that I worked with, and I interviewed some branch managers. And the very first thing that the branch manager said to me is, I'm not going to lower my standards to hire or promote a woman. And I was kind of taken back because I was like, why would you do that? No one would ask you to do that. So there is sometimes a perception that women have to be overqualified. This is not just on the side of a male. Women themselves are just as guilty of this, of thinking that they need to be prepared 112% to do it. As a manager of men on my team, I noticed a lot of the men would say, put me in, put me in. Even if they weren't quite ready, they were willing to at least expose themselves, be vulnerable, and learn. This is an area where women may need to reassess. Why is it that you think you need to be overqualified before you even think about the next promotion? Next.
So another question for reflection that I think is interesting. Number 5, do you agree that a man with a family is considered stable, but a woman with a family is a potential liability? Well, we hope you know the answer to that, but let's think about it a little bit. While it's technically illegal to, in an interviewing a candidate for a position, to ask a person about their family background, etc., is it really that different when we already know the candidate and they're being interviewed for a promotion? And so is there an unrecognized bias either in ourselves or in others that we look at someone who has a family, and if they're a woman who has been doing caregiving, as is often the case, do we see that as a liability? Number 6, are there any attitudinal or experiential differences between the generations that will impact gender parity? Well, this is really interesting, and I think we're seeing some of the results of these generational differences in the Great Resignation. Younger generations have often been raised with a lot more division of labor, and so they're in the family household, so they're used to their fathers and their mothers often giving equal care. They also have been trained in classrooms to have teammates. And so I think that they have been raised in a different world than maybe those of us who were raised in the 60s. And so they expect to see gender parity in the workforce. And when they get to the workforce and don't find it in our profession, they are not comfortable, and we wonder why we are not able to retain some of the younger generations to grow our profession and this career. So let's give that some thought in saying, can we attract not only women, but young women into our profession by the culture that we have in our organizations? Next.
So, question for reflection, number 7. What strategies can overcome the do-it-all syndrome? I like to refer to this as the S on the chest, where you're the super mom, the super community worker, the super advisor. You know, sometimes we really need to rethink this whole opinion and hire help. It is not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It is actually a sign of strength. You know, we have here, just as a joke, marry or train a supportive partner. Years ago, when I decided to go in management, I asked my husband to quit his job and follow me. And that was very, very unique. He stayed at home with the children and was highly supportive. And it made all the difference in the world. Hire house cleaners. I coach a lot of women who are just exhausted trying to be all things to all people during the week, and on the weekend they're doing different things. And I actually will say to them, you are competing against people who are not cleaning toilets on weekends. Think about that. Hire a nanny, get as many people on your team as possible. So the answer to this question is all of the above. If you are going to be phenomenal at this industry, which you can be, and in this profession, get the kind of help to support you, to help you do what you need to get done. And then what would you do if you applied for a promotion and you got turned down? Here again, as I mentioned earlier, first as women, we try to over prepare, but then when we, finally step out there and make ourselves vulnerable and we apply for the position and we get turned down, we get defeated. You just have to brush yourself off and get back out there, reapply for the next opening, reevaluate what happened, but don't just stop. Don't just let a knockdown be a knockout. We have to stay very strong and come back again and again. We have to do what it needs to be done in order for us to excel and to be all the things we're talking about here for our clients and for our company and for our profession. Next.
So question 9, describe the best outcome for women and men when gender parity is achieved. So is it that men lose if women win, or men win when women win, or men lose and women lose? So the answer is that this is a win-win. So this misconception is certainly based on an unfounded fear that in order for women to win, men must lose, right? It's not a zero-sum game. So it's a win-win. And if only 15% of financial advisors are female, and if most clients are female, then if access is raised, then clients are better served, both male clients and female clients. So it truly is a win-win. And number 10, our last thought-provoking question: why are discussions about gender parity considered as male bashing? And if we look at all 3 of these answers, it could be a bit of all of the above. And the longer that we let this linger, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. This is about men and women, not men or women at the table. It is not male bashing for women to have a seat at the table. Gender balance at the table, that allows us all to do a better job, hearing all voices for valuable influence. And in fact, research shows, as we've mentioned before, that when women are involved, companies are more profitable. So for businesses, follow the money, and it makes sense, and it's the right thing to do. So we'll look at the next slide.
So we've given you some great reflections to think about, and now we'd like to move on to solutions. We can't wallow around in the ain't it awful forever, although it is easy to do that. Let's move on to some solutions. And we'd like to take a look at 3 stakeholder groups. Solutions for women as clients, solutions for having women financial advisors and agents, and some solutions for the 3rd stakeholder, the financial profession organization at all levels. Next.
So our first stakeholder group are women as clients. So we have our 3 top topics or top solutions when we serve women as stakeholders. We have communication, relationships, and decision-making. So first, as we look at appropriate communication precedes being inclusive. And inclusivity is the path to diversity and parity. Excellent communication is more than just using the right words. In fact, in chapter 5 of our book, which I'm going to hold up here, chapter 5 of our book is entitled, What Did I Say? What Did You Hear? We discuss word choices, we discuss the role of nonverbal communication and intentional messaging. We know that when we get communication right professionally, it matters, and personally too. It's a great chapter. So second, that focus on relationships. So we must first build a relationship with women clients before they want to decide whether to retain our services or to certainly buy something. And sometimes we need to tap women on the shoulder and invite them to enter into a client relationship with us, because they're probably not going to ask. So we need to reach out to them. I know that's what happened with me. Someone tapped me on the shoulder to become a client. I would have never thought of doing it myself. So also, when a client is a couple, and we mentioned this before, we as advisors must deliberately include that non-financial partner in the planning process, and sooner than later. So we do want to remember that awful statistic that 70% of widows leave the advisor because they didn't feel like they had a relationship with that advisor. So relationships, that focus is critical with our stakeholder group of women clients. And third, if women control the majority of wealth and they make the majority of decisions about money, it certainly only makes sense that women need to be the client of focus. So let's work on tailoring our client experience to meet the needs of women as clients. This just makes good business sense, and it should be our priority. And typically what we find, of course, is that when we tailor the client experience to accommodate the needs of women, men like it just as well too. So with that, we're on to our next stakeholder group.
So the next stakeholder group is looking at financial advisors and agents. And we already mentioned in this early statistics that the community is made up of 51% women as a whole. So do we have 51% of agents as advisors? Does it reflect the community you serve? And obviously we're far from 51%. So this is a very, very compelling reason why we need to have gender parity in our profession. The other second reason why having women as advisors and agents is it allows you to form wonderful selling teams to collaborate. You can have people in the team who focus on better solutions, people on the team who focus on better service. And when I was a regional manager in the financial service profession, we would talk to financial advisor teams and say, if you don't have women as part of your team, you are not only missing the opportunity in the marketplace, as Daralee just suggested, but you're also shortchanging your team. Your team could be so much better if you have a equal number of women and men on your financial advisor team. So because women are excellent at building relationships, this kind of diverse team of selling will lead to not only higher profitability for financial agents and advisors, but higher retention for those of us who are in leadership, and most importantly at all, higher retention. Now, who is responsible for recruiting more women advisors into our profession? We mentioned this earlier, and I would challenge the women who are on the call today to say that we are just as responsible for recruiting women into this industry and this profession as anyone. Who better knows the wonderful benefits of this career? Flexibility, no cap on wages based on your effort. And many, many women want to make a difference in the community and have a strong passion for service. These things are all highlights of this career. And so we as women, along with everyone in the organization, should be recommending and recruiting other women to be financial advisors and agents. Next.
So now we've talked about the client and we've talked about the advisor. Let's talk about the organizations, our professional organizations that we are a part of. How do we use them to find a solution? Well, it's going to take the whole organization to commit to this, to commit to accelerating this goal for success. Not to just say, well, that's a nice to have, but a must have. And how do we do that? How do we change this commitment? How do we change what we do? We may need to tie compensation to behavior. There's a company that I am aware of that did just that last year. that part of their bonus for their management was that they needed to have a true commitment to hiring women and minorities, and it made a big difference. So this is putting the walk and the talk together. So we got to commit to saying this is an important issue, not just something we want to do. We have to look at the success of just dipping our toe in the water. It's not working. The whole strategy must be top of mind in an organization and cascade from the top all the way down if we're going to see any change. We also might need to look at our culture. Is your culture supportive of women? Is the culture that we have going to truly have another woman who's working there saying, I need you to come and work here. This is a great organization. You know, my daughter who's in the business shared with me that, you know, when she first got in, she had my grandson, he used to have ear infections all the time. She was always leaving the job, and she was so afraid that she would get fired that one day she took him and put him underneath her desk as a baby and to keep working. Are we asking women to do that kind of stuff, to hide who they are and what they're doing? Or are we supporting them and adapting our culture? You know, we've all heard the story of, should we have the 7:30 in the morning meeting? Well, that might work for some, but it may need to be adapted if you're going to bring more women into your environment, because they, as we've already talked about, are the majority of the caregivers in our society. We need women here. We need women in our industry, and we need to help women lift their financial position, because rising tide lifts all boats. It helps society, it helps everything, it helps our economy. How we recruit. I know we recruit ourselves. And so if I wanted to recruit someone who doesn't look like me or talk like me, I've got to put myself in a position to meet those people and to find out who they are. So I challenge you to also think about, how do you recruit? How are you hiring? Are you using unconscious bias? You know, years ago, the symphony orchestras of the world went to blind auditions, and they had a 50% increase on the number of women who were hired into symphonies when they no longer knew what their gender looked like. So hiring and changing how we look at things is going to make a major impact. Daralee, Linda, and I are in love with a profession that did everything wonderful for us and gave us a great life. So part of what we'd like to see is everyone else in this profession excel as well. So, and when we look at this, one of our solutions we're saying is, look how you hire, look how you support women, look how you promote women, adapt your culture, and let's really put some commitment, some teeth behind it would be nice to have, and put it as an imperative that we must have. Next. You're on mute, Daralee.
Very important. So as we've looked at our 3 stakeholder groups, and we've given you 3 solutions for each of those stakeholder groups, coaching is another solution. So as we look at this coaching word cloud, we see that coaching has many moving parts, and they're all critical components regardless of which stakeholder group we're addressing. So we have found that where real solutions come from is from each of us as individuals, then coming together collectively, and that for real results, coaching is the optimal path. So we have found that individual coaching, that's what really moves the ball. Where coaching is the solution for clearly results-based initiatives like gender parity. So we find that in coaching, meeting people where they are, whether in the C-suite, whether the agent, advisor, or the client, the coaching process adds to our viewpoints, and it allows for a safe space to ask the tough questions, like the questions that we've asked you here today. Those were tough ones. And then to build the processes and the skills to execute on the solutions for inclusion, diversity, and gender parity. In fact, in coaching, and we have mentioned this, many women have the, hey, I'll do it on myself syndrome, or the, I'm going to wait till it's perfect before we do that syndrome. So we coach to overcome these issues because this initiative, it calls for teamwork. We cannot do this alone. We are so much better together, and we can move way faster together than flying alone. So let's work to solve this together and to solve it soon. Next, please.
We know we've given you a lot of information today. It's almost like drinking from the fire hose, right? But we'd like for you to take one thing away from today. And that's, in the last 40 years, there hasn't been any real significant change in our industry and in our profession. That the percentage of women in upper management may have moved from 8 to 10%, but that's not good enough. You know, and it's safe that for us to say, we love the industry. What do you think? Should we be tenacious and fight for this change? Or do we just give in and let status quo take over, which we know means that we may be dooming ourselves because the market is changing. I feel like that book, Who Ate My Cheese? You know, they move the cheese. Women are coming into their own in every other profession. We serve those professions. We need to be aware. Will we be patient and wait for change? A few years ago, I was at a wonderful seminar on this topic, and two men I really love and admire got up and said, "This is just going to take time." I raised my hand and I said, "I've been in the industry for 40 years. How slow do we go?" It is time for us to make a difference. And this isn't just on men. This is about women stepping into their own power and knocking on the door and saying, I need a seat, I deserve a seat, and having the confidence to continue to do it. We owe it to this profession. It has been a wonderful profession, but we need to step in and stop waiting for someone to recognize us and have the confidence to take the positions that we deserve. Next.
We have cited many different references and background for the statistics and the studies. There's been great research in this area and it's constantly being updated. I noticed in the chat, excuse me, someone asked again for the name of our book, and there it is. We'll see a cover again in a few seconds, but I would encourage you to share not only these resources with your own thoughts and studies, but to share them with others, men and women in our profession, to help educate all of us. And as Thomasina said, to really make a difference and motivate others. So Daralee, you want to wrap us up here?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. So we would like to thank NAFA, certainly for inviting us here today, for celebrating women, and for having this critical conversation about the importance of gender parity in our financial services profession that we all love. We have been happy to share a little bit from our book, Women Matter. Our website is right there. If you go on it, you can see what are the chapters. It also has a click that will take you to Amazon. It is just a great tool for whether you're a leader on how to hire women, how to keep women as advisors. If you're an advisor looking for, hey, maybe I could be better at that communication part, absolutely, please grab it paperback and do watch though for our second edition. And our goal is to release it in 2022 because we're not at 50-50 yet. And so gender parity is still a work in progress. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. We know that your time is precious. So we're just honored to have been able to be with you today. So thank you, Suzanne, too.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I did have a couple questions. If you have a couple more minutes, panelists.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. I think one of the best questions. So number one, I'm just going to put my hand up and say, I am so guilty of everything you've said and the great thought-provoking questions. I so think the supermom and the 112% that we are so guilty of doing. and the need to be overqualified. I can so relate, and I think many of the people on the call today can. And if not, we'll keep spreading that word, because I think it is so important, and it is somewhat how you're raised and somewhat generational. One of the big questions we had is what really resonated, Thomasina, was that the example of the blind auditions in the orchestras and moving to that. Any insights or tips for how to do that in our industry? You know, how could we make ourselves a little bit more, open and, not take these other pieces into account?
Well, in many ways, I think what we set up a recruiting process where you may not interact until you're at least a third in, and you would do phone interviews, and maybe the hiring person doesn't do all of that. They collect the data first before they make a decision. And that's when you would meet somebody at the first time. And I also think, this is not just gender. We also have this in the African-American community and in the Latino community with names. I mean, Jamal is going to be Black, and, and you might have, another name that is ethnic. And so we really have to take a look at our conscious and unconscious bias and just talk to ourselves. I tell people every time, before you go in an interview, step back and have a talk. Just say, this is not about me. This is about the person in front of me. And I am here to get to know them. So you talk less, you ask more questions, and you withhold your bias. But, it would be great on blind interviews if we could just get people to, send out email questions. That's another way to do blind auditions. Ask good questions, gather that data before you do face-to-face.
So, it's interesting on that one. I know that I was reading the other day as part of that idea that some of the human resource professionals are starting to block out the actual name and where they're actually located for that reason, right? And just stick to the facts of the actual resume and the pieces there, because it's so telling. And I think another interesting thing is, because Zoom has become so pervasive during this time of COVID, you are getting now all this full information that maybe before, if you just had a phone call, you didn't know.
Yeah.
I think it's also equally interesting and very disruptive, but a huge opportunity for financial services that we have had in some ways COVID, and we broke in some of the geographic boundaries, right? And financial services has been forced to advance, in years and innovate, but it gives huge opportunities to other pockets of populations that haven't traditionally been in this field, right? I mean, there are some companies out there that are, their bread and butter is picking off people that are changing careers and things like that. But I think this gives a huge opportunity to do so. I also have, the younger population, our Centennial or Generation Z population, with a lifespan 104. They're being taught, they might have 3 careers in their lifetime, which many of us as different generations were not taught. So maybe one of those could be financial services, right? Because of the flexibility and all of these pieces. But I think those are some interesting points that have come across. I also would ask all of you to, a little comment on this one. The question I'd ask is really about financial literacy and financial security. And why has it taken so long? To your point that Thomasina, you made when you said, how slow are we going to go? What about financial literacy being actually taught in a formal capacity? So any thoughts on that, about the fact that generations have not had that, and the work that you do there? Anyone have a thought on that?
Yes, I will just mention that when I got my doctorate in leadership and organizational change, my dissertation was the role of financial education on financial literacy for women. And it was an exploratory study of promising practices. And so there are a lot of comments we could make on financial literacy, and we would love to come back to do that. But it is similar to what we presented here. It is an all hands on deck. When you look at the stakeholders of focus, we have to look at the clients. We just have to look at equipping advisors and agents to be able to provide that, because advisors' days are full, right? From beginning to end. And to build in a financial education component, that's how I built my world for 34 years in financial services was based on and teaching classes, but not so for everyone. And it's really great for women to, I mean, women almost is demand a good word, ladies, demand the education so that they can be informed. So thank you for asking that question. And the organizations, they have such a critical role. And I know Linda had something she wanted to add.
No, that I love those comments, and it's really interesting, Suzanne, that you bring this up, because the three of us were just talking this week on this very topic. I just wanted to add something to the idea of the blind audition, a very creative idea that I have seen passionate financial service professionals who lead an organization that is really not gender diverse at all. In fact, they might not have any women in their organization. So they've reached out to professional women in the community, a real estate agent or an attorney or a doctor, and asked those women to sort of serve as an ad hoc initial interviewer on the agency's behalf to sort of interview some women applicants. And it was an interesting creative idea of sort of reaching out to the community and saying, this is a goal for me, and I sure need your help in interviewing women applicants so that my unintended bias isn't showing up. And the other thing that it did is that helped those women professionals in the community saying, oh, here's a wonderful career opportunity. Do I know anybody else that I can refer? So I thought it was a very creative strategy. I just wanted to share it.
That's great. Last question that we did get as well was, it's kind of a two-pronged question. Greatest challenge and greatest reward in recruiting women.
The greatest challenge I find is women sometimes themselves, when we tell them that this is a commission-based income, you know, that whole security. I'll never forget when I decided to go into the industry, my mother was very upset with me. I was giving up that good paying, secure job as an underwriter. You know, the fact that I made way more money and had way more freedom was not in her mindset. And so that is one of the greatest challenges that I find. Is that it's just different, and people are afraid of that. The greatest reward, I could be at my kids, all of their school things. And I was a State Farm agent, and I would pick up my children and bring them back to my office, and they would do their homework and have TVs. And so the greatest reward is they grew up looking at mom as a business owner. And so they're business owners now and better employed because they get a different exposure to life than had I done something differently.
Oh, how wonderful is that? And I love the comment, just the idea that you put out there that you're teaching the patterns for basically generations coming behind you. I think that's such a salient point. So Linda, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I found one of the biggest challenges is that women don't want to be salespeople, and they don't think of selling as something they want to do. And even worse, they don't think of helping as sales because we have to make them get over that idea. I always use the example, if you go into a high-end department store like a Nordstrom's and you buy a suit or a blouse, and the sales clerk says, hey, would you like to have a scarf that goes along with that? You say, oh, great idea. And you walk over to the scarf department, she helps you buy something. You don't walk out of that store saying, oh my gosh, that woman sold me something. You walk out saying, wow, that was really helpful. And so we need to change the mindset of women that this isn't a sales career. Yes, you're selling, but the reason you're selling is to help people. And that the four-letter word is not sell, the four-letter word really is help. And it's a good one.
Love that. Daralee, any final thoughts there?
Yes, I think one of the biggest challenges in recruiting women is the lack of visibility of this has the best career ever for women. And so I think the solution to that is if I had to pick one thing, it would be to get into the schools, create the visibility for our undergrads, our grads, even let's talk to seniors in high school. Let's get this career as a visible choice. And if we can start early, we can address the professionalism of being excellent in sales and taking people to important life-changing, multi-generational solutions. So if we start early, get in front of them, then we'll have enough women to interview, because that was probably one of the biggest challenges. Even though you'd walk into any of my offices and you'd see lots of women, it was hard to fill the interviewing pipeline with women. We had to work really hard to get them in there. So visibility of the career.
Love that. So I'm going to look to all of you to continue to work with NAIFA to help us do that. We would like to do that in partnership. And then I'd also just tell the audience, thank you for everyone for showing up. We did have a couple comments. We'll send this out as an on-demand format. But if you like this, you'll also like some of the other work we've done within NAIFA, within our Talent Development Center and our diversity, equity, and inclusion work there. We have quite a few webinars we've done that also focus on women, and specifically we have a white paper on African-American populations and serving that. We also look at some of that from the Business Performance Center that looks at then ownership ideas within that center. And also, we've really wrapping it up. This is going to be the statistics on what we're looking at from a long-term care perspective, especially for women, are staggering. So what we're going to face in the next couple of decades, I think to the point of Thomasina, Daralee, and Linda, we need to solve this and solve this now. And looking at that and how we're going to set ourselves up in a public-private partnership, whatever that looks like, but we need to get the help and get the right plan in place now. So again, thanks everyone so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next Advisor Day webinar series. Take care.